Hello, welcome to Soulprint Intuitive Tarot for May 22nd. Goodness, despite the quarantines and everything that's been going on, this month seems to have moved quite quickly. For those of you in the United States, you're going to be celebrating Memorial Day this weekend. For Canadians, we celebrated Victoria Day last weekend. So we're definitely sort of gearing up into the spring, summer season here in the Northern Hemisphere. And it feels like for many, it was a really hard, cold winter, whether it was temperature-wise cold or otherwise. And it feels nice to just be getting the sun a little bit more and warmer temperatures. So for those of you in the United States, I hope in whatever limited way you are able, that you have a good Memorial Day weekend. Okay, so today I want to take a look at a really long time ago, one of the very first political videos I did was labeled Death by a Thousand Cuts. And that really has been, if you think about it, that really has been the story of the Trump presidency. It is just a continual little slash marks. And people are saying, well, you know what? This guy, he must be made of Teflon or something because nothing sticks to him. Nothing sticks. And you know what? And I can't disagree with you because really nothing does stick to him apparently. But the thing is if you get enough of those little cuts, eventually you're going to bleed yourself to death, right? So that's what I want to do. I want to take a look at sort of what is going on in terms of his feelings, his reputation, what he perceives to be his truth and his reality. All right, so come on down. I have a question. Okay, so the question is, Trump, 1,000 cuts. Trump, 1,000 cuts. Trump, 1,000 cuts. All right. So from his, from his perspective, he doesn't like being president except for the adulation. But he really, in many ways, views the White House sort of as his castle. He likes to criticize it, this isn't nice enough or this isn't whatever enough. But the reality is he really does feel in some ways that he's finally come into his own as a resident of the White House. And that, whether he recognizes it or not, is actually a big part of the reason that he doesn't want to let go. And the worse the news gets, and the news is terrible, day after day after day. I mean, I heard this morning that on the Fox poll, Biden was 8 points ahead of Trump on Fox polls. So, he'll probably be ranting later on today about something's happened to Fox and they're all, they've missed the boat and they're not doing things right or whatever his story is. There is also this sense that he is trying to look beyond right now to see if he can get a handle on what he wants his future to look like, because slowly but surely he's really starting to come unhinged about the fact that there's a really good possibility that he actually may not pull this off. And trying to keep him balanced is near impossible. Everybody around him is trying to get him to balance, to stay on track, to stick to the message. And of course, it's possible because everything Trump does is about satisfying his own emotion, right? It's about this, this Knight of Cups, right? He just moves forward on what he feels. It's all about his emotions, his emotional satisfaction, his ego being fed. So that's the basis from which we begin. Okay. He's gotten some difficult news behind the scenes. All right. Whether, frankly, I don't know who's actually brave enough to give him difficult news, because he just like lashes out and retaliates as soon as he hears something that doesn't sit well with him. But be that as it may, what's happening is he's starting to understand that, even though he takes no responsibility for it, right? And this is the trick about understanding him. He doesn't take any responsibility for anything that happens on his watch, because his pattern, his lifelong, never mind as president, has been to blame someone else. And when you listen to him, of course, you understand that's how his mind works, right? Well, I was told by somebody. Many people say that. Like those kinds of, he doesn't really sort of deal in specifics very well. But what he's starting to realize is that there have been enough mistakes made, even though they're not his fault. Let's be clear, because this is how Trump feels it and how Trump views things. He's starting to get the idea that maybe these things could be adding up. And maybe those things that are adding up are not really going to be a good way for him to get a second term. So he's starting to feel very, hamstrung by this. He's starting to feel like the walls are closing in on him. And part of the reason he is so upset with the fact that he is running against Joe Biden is because, and I think like many people, whether you loved them or didn't like them, Obama and Biden kind of were like mushed together. And in many ways, they sort of became Obama-Biden, right? It was just like one and the other, right? And that was part of, frankly, what made the Obama presidency sort of so unique in its own right, was that the vice president really did seem to play a very sort of upfront role. You saw him, he was involved, he was right a little bit more, I think, than some previous vice president. And so he completely equates Biden with Obama. And because he has such visceral feelings about Obama, the fact that this Biden character dares to be his equal, his competitor for the thing that he covets the most, which is a second term, this is just sending him off the rails, just right off the rails, because to him, this is the equivalent of losing to Biden. Or sorry, to Obama, okay? Somewhere in his head, he's completely conflated the two, and because of that, he sees he feels like literally at a heart level, a gut level, that if he were to lose to Biden, it would be like, that black man winning again. And so he becomes more and more agitated, more and more in a state of starting to recognize that, his world is kind of coming down around him. And this tower represents those 1,000 cuts. It's everything. It's that huge accumulation of everything. It is the economy, which has tanked on him, and that was going to be what saved him. He's abysmal at healthcare. he is useless when it comes to handling the coronavirus. He has no confidence of the people. And even those people that voted for him really strongly in the last election, he's losing them by the busload. So that also kind of puts this incredible pressure on him, because he's starting to see that even though he did nothing wrong, and even though he is perfect, apparently some people in the United States actually don't agree with him. And that's really got him shaken up, because as long as the polls were sort of not great, but okay, he could continue to delude himself that, you know what, if there was just another push in the stock market or whatever, that he could clinch this thing. But what's happening is everything that he was going to hang his hat on has dissipated, and more things have been added to the list of things that he is an abysmal failure at. And so his focus then becomes incredibly self-centered. It boils down to, what can I get? How do I take the most out of this? How do I cushion my nest, okay, or feather my nest? So his focus right now has really shifted from, I'm the greatest thing that ever lived. Because let's not forget the one thing that will send Trump around the bend is being disregarded, disrespected, or ignored. And when you get poll numbers that Biden is beating you from 6, 8, 11%, that is being disregarded, right? So it's hitting kind of one of his Achilles heels. And because of that, he's sort of he moves closer inwards. And so then it just becomes all about him. I had to laugh yesterday because, he's been on and on about how he won't wear a mask in public because, he thinks it's going to look bad. And so I don't know if you saw, but there was a couple of pictures, in fact, taken of him at that Ford plant, behind the public, where he actually was wearing a black face mask. And unfortunately, it was a bad look, I just have to say, because when I saw the pictures of it, that was on Rachel Maddow, and apparently Jackie Spearhead sent the picture out, I guess, on her Twitter account or something. But when I saw him standing there with this black face mask, all I could think of is, oh my God, he really does look like a bandit, right? I mean, a white one might have been better, but a black one, I got this picture of, like, I don't know, 1820, robber robbing a stagecoach or a bank or something, right? So it was an unfortunate selection. I'm sure he wanted the black one because he felt that it looked strong and dignified and whatever he thought, but really it sent out a very convoluted message from my perspective. Okay, so now we know this guy doesn't sleep well at the best of times. Well, he's really, really not sleeping well, because he's becoming so anxious, so anxiety ridden, because he's starting to recognize that, you know what, his tricks aren't actually working anymore. You're going to continue to hear him making really outlandish and outrageous statements. It really is that, throw it against the wall and see what, if anything, sticks. And in the process of throwing it against the wall, of course, he says the most inane things. But that's going to continue because it's May, and he's absolutely tanking in the polls. What is that going to look like by August? What is that going to look like by October? Biden is leading in all these areas, and he's also leading with those white women, with the people The over 65 group who voted for Trump are not going to vote for him again. They're all swinging really hard to Biden. And so those are the 1,000 cuts, right? It's like he's got these lawsuits outstanding. I mean, and let's face it, the lawsuits really are all about him running out the clock. Like it really is, right? That's really what it boils down to. It boils down to, I don't want to have to deal with this, so I'm going to use every legal maneuver I can come up with, or my White House lawyers, worse, can come up with, to protect me and to drag this thing out. So at some point, it won't matter what the verdict is, because either I won't be around to have to face it or do what they want. I mean, because let's face it, right? If he is compelled to hand over his financial records, he's going to try to figure out some way to drag out that process. And with kind of the understanding that, well, even though the ruling comes down in June, maybe I can kind of, even at the point where I lose the election in November, I at that point can say, you don't need to see them. They're private now. I'm not going to be your president next year. And of course, I would have shown them to you next year, right? That kind of crap. So he's starting to just recognize that the things that he has used before aren't working, and that causes him to go into this place of really, really outrageous statements, of really, let's just distract. And so there's a lot of that going on. And what he doesn't understand, because he's not very clever, is that, okay, so his people are trying to get him out of the White House because he needs his ego fed. So they're going to put him into places and positions where he gets some attention. Okay, so yesterday apparently he went on a little bit of a rant at the Ford plant, because the auto workers union, I believe it was, is backing Biden. So even when he goes somewhere to get his ego massaged, it ends up kind of blowing up in his face. And then he says things that he really, really shouldn't have said, and his aides just smack their heads and go, oh my God, not again. And what Trump himself doesn't understand is that his little trips to boost his ego end up being very, very dangerous for him, because there's just more stuff that gets recorded of him being or doing or saying stupid things, okay? And at least for a while there, when he was holed up in the White House, and his focus was on the coronavirus, even though he got it all wrong and he never said one thing right. At least to some degree, they were able to kind of almost minimize the amount of attacking he was doing, right? But now, I mean, the restraints are off. There is no harness on this guy. And so the more he starts to realize that things are falling apart on him, and that his tricks aren't working, and that the tower's coming down no matter what he does, he's going to become more and more greedy and more self-interested. So what you're going to see are statements and actions that are just fundamentally wrong on a whole bunch of levels, and he's sticking to them. He's just going to grab on to whatever it is that he thinks in his head is going to work for him, because of course he is his best advisor. So the worse things get, the worse things are going to get with him, okay? Just from a mental standpoint, from lashing out, that kind of thing, you can really start to see him doing almost like anything he can to hang on to what he has. And in order to facilitate that, he's going to be very, very interested in getting that base riled up. What he has failed to understand is, because of his ineptitude, his base are the very people that are being hit very, very hard now, right? The heartland with that virus. And that over 65 base is in a trickier category in terms of being able to have this virus, recover from it in good health. Okay, so the very people he's sort of counting on are the very people who are pulling away from him, because they are finally starting to understand that he is actually threatening not only their livelihood but their actual physical life. So there's that. And you know what, this is the interesting thing, right, is he's really not getting the kind of help that you would think he would get. Okay, so nobody really anymore, or very rarely does any, except for that Kaylee chick and Kellyanne. But beyond that, I mean, in terms of senators, etc., you don't see a whole lot of them out there saying, of course he's right. The silence has become deafening, right? Nobody has anything to say. Nobody's actually really vocally and strongly supporting what he does and what's going on. And so because of that, he really is sort of being left to sort of his own devices, his wish, the promise that, they would put up with anything because they were getting what they wanted, is starting to backfire. And, the thing is that I'm sure to some degree there was a lot of wrongdoing, and he has insights or information about that, and that has held some people in line. But there is a very big difference between I've got nothing to say, no comment, and, standing on a soapbox and going on and on about how wonderful he is and he makes the most brilliant decisions, and, like Pence, thanks to the good work of our president. Good Lord. Okay. So what he believes is his justice, what he believes he should have, be entitled to, et cetera, et cetera. That's not happening for him. He's not getting the support behind the scenes that he believes he is entitled to. And that is either, it's not only, with the senators, it's with his own campaign office, it's with his supporters, it is with the senators, it is with the House. It is with his rallies. It is just everywhere he looks. He really feels he's getting shafted, because, of course, he's not clever enough to understand that the irony, of course, of that is that he has been shafting the country for 4 years now, right? There is a lot going on behind the scenes, in terms of his message, in terms of messaging what he says and does. There's a lot of friction going on behind him. And, he doesn't like that, right? It agitates him because they make him feel as if he's a problem. And he's not a problem. Everybody knows he's not the problem. It's all these other people who are the problem. And he just doesn't understand, because you know what? Sean Hannity, he says that he's doing a great job. And who wouldn't want to believe Sean Hannity? So that's literally kind of the scramble that's going on with him right now. And the more cuts, the more slices, the more bad polls, the more bad reviews, the more backroom information that comes out that really puts him in a terrible, terrible light. The more things that he tries to pull out of that in reality are incredibly helpful to the United States. And he pulls away either because it's money, or he just doesn't like them, or, they don't share his worldview. So all of this these are all slices, right? These are the 1,000 cuts. It is perpetual. It is every day. It is not a big explosion. It is going to be like a marathon. It really is. It's sort of like a marathon of injuries that keep him in a place where he really can't make a lot of headway. And people around him are becoming honestly really kind of confused about how they're supposed to message the insanity. Yeah. So he feels that other people are trying to take away his strength, that someone is trying to steal what is rightfully his, even though I hear you all screaming, it's not rightful. Okay, I know, I got it. But this is his perceptions. This is what he sees and feels and thinks. So for him, he feels as if somebody is trying to steal his presidency. Somebody is trying to steal his respect. Somebody is trying to steal his, his value. And it feels almost like every time he turns and goes down another corridor, he slams into somebody who is simply stronger, smarter, better spoken, better educated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, coming up into his face. And some of these people are his own people, okay? Don't kid yourself. The reason he doesn't listen to those morning security briefings, those daily security briefings, is because he doesn't understand what they're saying. Okay, it's real basic. It would be like if somebody put me in a master's class of calculus. Let me tell you, I barely squeaked through, my education with basic math, okay? I would just sit there with my eyes glazed over because I would literally not comprehend what they were talking about, right? Well, that's exactly what happens to him. And so he gets distracted, his mind wanders, he asks some really dumb questions because he's trying to maintain his importance in an environment where he, even himself, knows that he doesn't know what the heck is going on around him. And so more and more these days, he seems to be being confronted by those kinds of realities, right? And his only defense is to change the topic or to bully his way in and shut things down. You don't want to ask him any questions, or I'm not answering any more questions, or you're rude for asking me that question. That's his only defense at this point. He is truly frightened, truly frightened. As we complete May and go into June, and maybe even to the beginning of July, he is going to continue to experience these really harsh changes of fortune, okay? He's starting to realize that the good times are coming to an end, that all of the adulation, et cetera, is now being pulled back away from him. And again, even though the whole country didn't agree with him, and in fact, more than half the country didn't agree with him, he had his base that kept him really, really riled up. And I'm not saying they've all disappeared. They haven't. But they're starting to pull away. And he can't afford for not one person to pull away because that was how he got elected in the first place. Well, goodness gracious, he's already lost women. And who can blame? Who can absolutely blame that? As I said, he's losing the seniors. His healthcare ideas are ridiculous, particularly in view of the pandemic. He can't handle the economy because he pushed it until a place where it started, it was in sort of like a precarious position. And so things started when that whole oil situation happened, things just started crumbling. And then you add the pandemic onto that and they sort of tanked out. So he doesn't have that going for him. He's got nothing. And so there is this sense that he is not being insulated, protected enough. And that is part of what is really angering him, right? He feels, it was the same thing, right, when that valet was diagnosed with the virus, and his reaction was, oh my God, this guy has served me for however long, and, I really hope he's going to be okay. It was, who the hell isn't protecting me enough that this guy was able to get into my circle, right? It's like that kind of, and what he's finding is more and more and more, he's not being protected. He feels he's not being insulated enough. So these are really two really, really interesting cards. His retreat or his illness or his ending is going to be directly connected to his money. Okay. And I mean, listen, Jackie Spears has been screaming, follow the money for 4 years now, right? But I'm wondering if, because these two cards are sitting the way they are, if perhaps those court cases are not going to go so well for him. Or the fear of something else coming out about his money gives him pause. Okay, Michael Cohen is now out of prison. He apparently says he'll have something to say next week. So that will be interesting. I think that Michael Cohen should hush and save, personally, hush and save all of his ammunition for August, September, no, really September, October, right? if he really wants to do the most amount of damage to Trump, that would be the timing that would be most beneficial. So there we have it. There is Trump's feelings and attitudes about the fact that he is now going through and I believe it's karmic, 1,000 cuts. That's exactly what's happening to him here. And ultimately, that is going to be what brings him down. So before I say goodbye, one more thing, because I've tilted the camera slightly, so now you can see those things on my wall. I'm going to tell you what they say, because when they used to be visible, I would always get people saying, what exactly is that? Does that all say? So I'm going to read it to you. It says, imagine your dream, create your happiness, live your life, cherish every memory, love every moment, and embrace every possibility. And with that, take care, be well, and I'll see you really soon. Bye.